Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Executive Coaching and the Board, the Missing Conversation. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. We have a very interesting panel. Um, but before we start, and while we're waiting for a few more people to arrive, I'll just give a quick introduction to Leadenhall for those who don't know us well, and then we'll get on to the topic in question. So I think many of you do know us, but just to remind you, we're now 15 years old. We're a London City headquartered international coaching practice. We do in-person coaching, digital coaching via Coaching on Demand, our platform, team coaching, broader leadership and professional development, and psychometrics, particularly Hogan, everything DISC, insights, and five behaviors. We are primarily financial services, but having said that, we have clients in a range of other sectors, including real estate, telecoms, engineering, pharmaceutical marketing, consulting, executive search. And we've got about 100 coaches across the UK, continental Europe, US, and Asia Pac. Our proposition, we're very much focused at the premium end of the market, high quality business experienced coaches. We can be, because of the range of things we offer, a one-stop shop for a range of coaching needs. And we focus on very high quality client service. So anyone who's worked with us knows that we put a lot of time and energy into supporting our clients. We've got some specialist services. Today, we're going to talk about board coaching, but we also do parental transition coaching, women in leadership, career transition, and we've just launched an HR leadership accelerator program. So they're specific things within the broader remit of coaching. And we have a strong knowledge of psychometrics, and we're able to develop bespoke leadership development programs for organizations. So that's what we do. Today, we are going to be very simple. There'll be some introductions. I'm going to be initially asking some questions from the chair position, but we will open up for questions from participants, and then we'll just wrap up at the end. We have an hour together, but if we finish short of an hour, we finish short of an hour. We're not trying to fill the time available. We'll just cover the topics and see how it goes. In terms of our panel today, I'm Chris Woodman. I founded Leadenhall 15 years ago. My corporate career was primarily in HR. I was on the executive committee of two public companies, Colt Telecom and Aspen Insurance. And I worked with boards in both those organisations, and I supported, not surprisingly, the REMCO in those organisations, and sometimes the nominations committee. I'm going to go round the panel and ask them to introduce themselves, and I'll do it in the order that it is here. So, Rachel, if I could ask you to introduce yourself first.
Take my mute off would help. Okay, thank you. Yes, so I was most recently chair of Global Council for EMCC, which was about 30 presidents from all over the world. Prior to that, I was executive chair and president of EMCC UK. We have about 17,000 members in the world. I've also been a board advisor for two organisations, one an OD consultancy, and currently for an organisation called Talkwise, who specialise in communication. And I also work a lot in the SME and tech sector, and I'm also involved in a tech accelerator here in London.
Thank you. So I think we have Ian White next. Ian.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. I'm Ian White. My background is I was a lawyer. I worked my way up to being a general counsel, company secretary. Last 10 years, I've been a consultant, and the majority of my practice is board effectiveness reviews. I look at anything other than schools and sporting bodies for no particular reason. I do some coaching and team coaching. I do consulting with law firms and in-house teams, and I run the Cranfield Non-Executive Director Programme.
Brilliant. Thank you. Stephen Sidebottom.
Hi, my professional career was running HR for global banks, and then for the last 6 or 7 years, I've had a portfolio career, including non-exec roles, executive coaching, and some executive positions as well along the way. And I currently chair the Institute of Risk Management, which is a global professional body for risk professionals.
Thank you, Stephen. Mark.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm perhaps slightly unusual in that I started as a chartered surveyor and worked in commercial property development for something like 20 years. But then, for my sins, I decided to go into politics, and I was a member of parliament for 18 years. I rose to being a minister of state in the coalition government. I chose to leave politics in 2019. And wanted to have a third career. So I developed a career by going to Henley Business School, qualifying on their executive coaching course. And I think two-thirds of my time is probably as a board chair, non-exec director, but a third of my time was coaching. And I find that doing the two actually helps complement my work and strengthen my ability in both regards. So it's been a happy move out of politics, I have to say, in the last 7 or 8 years.
Brilliant. And Annette.
Well, hello everybody. I had a long corporate background in human resources, cross-sector globally, blue chip manufacturing, and then moved into FS, banking and insurance. I was a very brave girl 6 years ago, and I left corporate life as a CPO and moved into a portfolio career. I wanted more flexibility, but I also had this itch that I wanted to scratch about being self-employed and doing a number of different things. So I am now a non-exec director on 3 boards. I'm also REMCO chair for those 3 boards. And again, they're very different sectors. One's property, one's insurance, and one's fintech. And I enjoy the variety. But I probably do that for about 75% of my time. The other quarter is a combination of coaching and consultancy on people and culture. And I love it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you. So we have a very strong panel, all of whom work with boards in different ways or are on boards, chairing boards, NEDs, and all are also executive coaches. And so our theme today, executive coaching in the board, the missing conversation. In summary, board meetings are the primary legally recognized forum in which directors provide strategic direction, oversight, and governance. They're responsible for monitoring financial performance, approving key policies, managing risk, holding leadership accountable, and making major decisions that shape the future of the organization. So boards are pretty important. And I saw a statistic yesterday, which I haven't put in because I don't know if it's verifiable, but it was from Harvard Business Review. And it said that an effective board with strong collaboration and team characteristics impact the organization financially or are 800% more effective than dysfunctional boards. Now, whatever that piece of research is, I'm not quite sure, but I think it is interesting that the most important decision-making body, maybe arguably alongside the executive committee itself, they are run in so many different ways. And quite often there are issues at board level which are not to do with the governance and the practical technical issues, but quite often boards can struggle with dynamics that undermine effectiveness. So, there can be divisions between the executive and non-executive directors. And we all know, all the people on this call know that, and having experienced that. And I used to go to board dinners the night before and then watch the behaviour the following day. And there are clearly issues that can exist between the executive who are struggling to lead the business, get stuff done, prepare the board papers, turn up to board, etc. And the board members who are coming in and cross-examining them, exploring issues with them. And there's tension. Relationship between chair and CEO can be particularly sensitive. I can think of a very specific situation in which I worked where the chair clearly didn't like the CEO and had real issues. And there was all sorts of issues that were generated as a result of that, which were not productive and helpful for running the business. Lack of trust or openness in debate in the meetings, poorly structured meetings, ineffective chairing, limited attention to interpersonal dynamics and group decision making. I mean, this is just a few of the issues that can occur with boards. And, we're going to explore some of the implications of that through the discussion we're about to have. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and I'm going to start by asking my first question. And I'm going to ask Ian White to start the ball rolling. And in terms of the pattern of this discussion, what I'd like to do is ask the panel member a question. There might be a follow-up with another panel member. We're not going to ask all six to answer each question in some kind of rote. And then I will open up for anyone who might want to chip in with a further question on that topic, and then we'll move our way through. So to get started, Ian, I'm going to ask you what actually gets in the way of boards being as effective as they could be. And given your experience as a board reviewer, I think you're probably best placed to answer this. So over to you, Ian, on that question.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I mean, you've outlined quite a few of them. The one that suddenly occurred to me before this call, particularly in financial services, are the length of board papers. And I'm sure all of us will recoil in horror when you get a board pack on a Friday, which is 1,000 pages for a board meeting on a Tuesday. So that's your weekend reading. So there are lots of things, but I wanted to pick up on perhaps some things that are more related to what we're talking about today generally. And I think one of the first things I notice a lot is that the non-execs really don't know each other well enough. It's quite common to talk to directors and they'll say we really don't know each other well enough. So, for example, when I do board reviews, one of the questions I will ask is about social diversity. And that's because I'm very interested in social diversity generally, but it's also, I ask it not just because of that, but because it usually elicits another answer, which is just what I've said is, I've worked with Chris for 5 years on the board, but I've got no idea of his background. And I think that shows a huge lack of curiosity. And I think for boards to be really effective, and when I see really effective boards, people actually get to know each other. And of course, as you say, Chris, you can attend board dinners, but I think there could be more really just getting to know each other, getting to understand where each other's coming from, particularly important for the chair, because they will then know when to bring people in. But just actually understanding about people, I think is one of the reasons that boards aren't effective. I think the second thing is that in terms of succession planning, we focus a lot on skills. That's if you, for example, the financial services company, you're going to look at having people who've got that background. If you're going to have an audit committee, so you'll need somebody with an accountancy or banking background. And that's all very well and good. But when I run the program at Cranfield, one of the things I say to the delegates there is, if you've got 8 people around the boardroom table with all the right skills, but they can't stand working with each other, you've got a dysfunctional board. So I think we need to really focus or shift the focus to being looking at the behaviours. Are these people going to really fit into our particular board? Because every time somebody joins or leaves the board, the dynamic's going to change. And that doesn't mean we've all got to be best friends. We've got to be independent as board directors, but it does mean we need to be able to work well together, and be, if we go back to something like Lencioni, being able to have that trust and that candor in meetings. So I think that's something that we need to really change in our succession planning. I guess the final thing is I see a lot of boards who I would say are not teams, and I know there is a difference of opinion amongst directors about whether a board should be a team or not. I think it should. And again, one of the questions I ask in reviews is, are you a team or a group of individuals? And I would say about 75% of answers are we're a team or we're becoming a team. We may be fairly new, but I think you've got the right objectives, clear objectives. then you really should be a team. And I think if you're not, that's going to hamper your effectiveness. So those are three perhaps different things from the things you've already highlighted.
Rachel, would you like to build on that?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything Ian said, and I also agree about the team comment. So I know not everyone does, but I'm aligned on that. I also think there's something around awareness of context. So I think quite often what we tend to do is look straight inwardly. So we look at who's on the board, how the board are working. But I think there's also something about the context in which we work and having that systemic awareness around things like what's happening in the industry or sector, and how that might impact the board as well, what people are bringing with them to the board. I've been having lots of conversations recently with people who are feeling a lot of anxiety, and actually it's the things that are going on in the world that's causing that, not just stuff that's going on in the organization and the company. So I think that ability to look up and outwards and to see the landscape in which we're working is also really important.
Cool. Thank you very much. I suppose the question that we would ask, and obviously we have a vested interest in this, is we work with executives in organizations at multiple levels. But why is it that coaching rarely extends to the board itself? Mark, I mean, I'd be interested in your view on that as somebody who's a chair of an organization and a coach. Why is it that we don't see many board members coached, or some of the other skills around team coaching and that kind of thing? So what's your thinking on that?
Well, I currently chair three different boards, and it does surprise me how rare the coaching for the people sitting around the table is actually ever considered. But I think the reason is cultural. There are practical issues, but I think it's principally cultural. And I say that having helped both an FD or an aspiring FD about to join a board, and separately a non-exec director, who both came to me quite, wanted everything to be very confidential. They didn't want to know other colleagues to know. And I sort of asked them, well, why is that? And they said, well, I feel I'm there for my experience, and therefore, I shouldn't actually have to consider coaching, but somehow feel that I'm not getting it right. And actually, what they'd got right was that experience matters on a board, but actually effectiveness is just as important, and the two are not the same. So in the case of one of the people I was working with, oodles of financial experience, but not very good at really getting to the powerful questions that would help the board understand what was going on in the company, but also then be able to work with the executive team to move things forward. So I think it is a cultural thing. There are practical issues as to who is accountable if you're actually doing the coaching. Who do you report up to if the chair is taking coaching? But I think it's fundamentally about a sense that we're all around the table as a board member here for our experience. Therefore, there is an inherent assumption that somehow we don't need coaching in this different role. And I think that's a mistake. So it is a cultural thing from my point of view, but I don't know, others may have a different perspective.
It's interesting. I work with an organization, and it is only one organization, where all new board members are offered three coaching sessions. And the three coaching sessions are to help them transition onto the board. And it's mainly taken up by people who have never been on a board before. And they're going from executive to non-executive. The organization I have in mind also has people of different age groups, people relatively inexperienced coming onto that board, and therefore helping them. Not just they have the governance training. I think most boards will provide some governance training through the company's secretary, perhaps, but it's more about what's actually expected at a board. And I think it was initiated after a specific incident where a young board member came on board and really didn't know any of either the etiquette, and you could say, well, what's etiquette got to do with it? But just didn't really understand how a board worked. And it was a pretty messy board as a result. And so the coaching was introduced just to help people step back, think, understand how's their impact and how best to get influence at a board. And also, what's the purpose of you being on a board and why are you there? What's your motivation?
I do
Any
think
thoughts?
the chair can change that culture. If the chair takes the lead on that, I think that's a good way of doing it. But anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Annette, have you got any thoughts on this? Why? I mean, you're on 3 boards and you're a coach. What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I really like Mark's word assumptions. I think there is an assumption, yes, about the knowledge and experience, but also that because of that knowledge and experience, and non-exec directors can just deal and manage anything that comes across their path while they're on the board. And they'll just, because of all their prior knowledge experience, just be able to manage it, or they'll be able to build relationships and get working as a team. My observations, and by the way, having sat on both sides of the table, because I used to support the board when I was a CPO, I would say to you that actually it can be pretty tough being a non-exec director. You have to deal with some difficult topics, be it business, people, or dynamics. And sometimes you need that coaching support, but you also need that safe space to go and discuss that as well. So I think it's the wrong assumptions, but also it's a missed opportunity as well. And like you, Chris, I'm seeing more and more as people are being onboarded into NED roles, they are being offered the opportunity to have coaching, but also it's an opportunity for the CPO and the chair of the committee to change the mindset around actually coaching is not just punitive, it's because a lot of mindset is around that's what it used to be for. It's for developmental gaps, isn't it? Well, actually, no, it's also to support people optimize the performance and the relationship. So I think there's a shift we've got to get in understanding what it can bring to boards as
Hmm.
well.
And when it comes to boards, and we this word dysfunction comes up quite a bit, and maybe it's a bit harsh, but it feels dysfunctional sometimes. Some of the behaviours, maybe sometimes the etiquette. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't mind asking you, Rachel, what are the most common dysfunctions you've seen on boards?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of group this into 3 things. I really like the work by Jeremy Cross. He's written a really good book on board dynamics. He talks about the 11 C's model, but the 3 areas he focuses on around behaviours are cohesion, challenge, and culture. And we've already alluded to some of those things today. I think the first thing that comes to mind, really, as everyone has said, a poor chair, because actually the chair has to create the conditions for the board to thrive. So, things I've come across, they're in the job because no one else wanted to be the chair. So they kind of volunteered themselves, and then that creates all sorts of issues and challenges. I've experienced that myself with the chair. They're on the way out or they've overstayed. So, people, they have attachment issues. Part of their identity is around being a chair or being on a board, and therefore they really should have stepped down, but they haven't, or becomes sort of an all-encompassing part of who they are and how they present themselves at dinner parties or drinks parties. So there's something there around that. Or the other alternative is that they're either too dominating or quite aggressive. So they haven't learned how to effectively challenge. We've all seen people in board meetings who think it's really clever to ask that really sharp, nasty question. And yet the rest of us are sort of recoiling in horror. So really, those sorts of things. Operating as a group, I think, referencing Ian and the team piece. If you operated as a group and a distinct sort of set of individuals who don't have a common purpose and you're not working as a team, that really allows bystanders. It allows people just to sort of sit back, fold their arms and watch things happening. If you don't feel you're part of the team, you're not going to call out people's bad behaviors or bullying when you see it. So I think that's why that whole team piece is really important. Focusing too much on the what and not on the how and the why. So, yeah, we're all here to make decisions. We're here to, look at governance. We're here to ensure the organisation is successful or profitable, but not really focusing on how the board's working and why we're here. And I have a very long list, but I'm conscious of time. So perhaps we want to move on to the next question, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was actually going to Steve, I was just going to get you to chip in on this before we move on to the next question.
Thanks for that, Chris. And maybe just to build, I mean, one of the things about framing it as dysfunction is that it invites you to look for bad behavior, things that we would immediately recognize as bad, and we've heard examples of that. But I think the question is not dysfunctions, but function. So how does it work? What are the recurring patterns of how a board works? So, for example, something that I would see as not good is a recurring pattern around how quickly conversations settle. If things become clear really quickly, quite early, the board moves on, and only later you realize there was a whole load of stuff that you should have explored that you didn't. Now, at the time, that may feel fine, but in retrospect, it doesn't. Another is the way information arrives, and Ian talked about 1,000-page reports. I mean, these are often well structured, really complete, and it can make it really hard for a board to see what's there, what isn't, and what's been fully tested or not. And then I think the question of how uncertainty is treated, and Ian talked about curiosity in terms of interpersonal relationships, but that same curiosity is fundamental around understanding the more difficult, the less well-formed, the trade-off parts of the situation, the trade-offs that are implicit in how decisions are made. And they often don't get nearly enough airtime because people will move a conversation naturally onto the easier things.
Mm. So we obviously collectively have decided to promote the idea that coaching can do something to help with some of these things. So if coaching was applied effectively at board level, what would actually be different? And I'm actually going to start with you again, Stephen, because I'm interested, given your combination of backgrounds. I think you'd be interesting on this. But if we were to put this magic wand in and inject something to do with the coaching world, what actually how would it actually help things?
So I think the question of coaching is around the helping people to understand the system and how to help the board work more effectively in as a collection of individuals. And I think quite a lot of that is slowing things down, allowing the space to reflect, allowing an exploration of different perspectives as the conversation moves on. And I think it really roots when you're working with individuals. It really is rooted in not the traditions of performance. So it's not about visibility or influence or profile or career trajectory. It's very much about helping individuals think about how they contribute to the collective thinking of the whole board. So that's going to be stuff like, what do they notice? When do they speak? When do they hold back and why? What happens as the conversation moves on and opens up and closes down? So it feels to me that it becomes rooted in very real behaviors and dynamics of the board, but often subtle. And so it's often the less noticed, and therefore coaching can really start to draw that out in a very effective way.
Mm. Thank you, Stephen. And I'm going to come to you, Ian, because you've been a board practitioner and supporting boards, and you have a legal background, and somehow you ended up deciding you wanted to bring coaching and become a coach as part of your offering to boards. So you've seen this journey. So tell us a bit about why you added the exec coaching to your skill set, but your observations on where coaching can have impact.
Clearly, I wanted to escape from being a lawyer, so that was one. Um, uh, I think if I look back at my executive career, I'm working with boards there, but obviously in a very different role. I mean, boards don't go wrong they do go wrong because processes and procedures aren't followed, but they really go wrong because we don't have the right behaviours. Coming back to the behavioural and the right dynamics. And I guess that's what really interested me was, we could do an internal board review and we could ask the questions about the papers and the board meeting themselves. But for me it was really, well, that's just the foundation, and the critical thing is to get the behaviours right. And so that's, I guess, the interest of moving away. And I would say I didn't find being a lawyer easy, but I find this work actually much more challenging. It's much more interesting. And I mean, Annette and you, Chris, and others will have had the experience of being a chief people officer. I think I always get told off by lawyers, but I always think that's a much more critical role in a business than being the general counsel, because businesses are about people, and how they work together or they don't work together. So I guess it was an interest there. I mean, in terms of actually coaching the board and what that would help, and I'd echo what Stephen has said. I mean, the things that came to mind for me were things like having clear contracting. How could coaching help there? And creating the right awareness, creating the right presence. But I think a really good thing for coaching, and we've mentioned the chair quite a lot. I think the chair is such an underrated role. I think it's such a difficult role to do well. I mean, and Stephen and others have got lots of Rach have got lots of experience of this, and I haven't. I was an interim chair for 4 months, and that was long enough. And I think it is a real challenge to do it well. There's so much to think about, and it's not just the getting the papers out on time, making sure that the executives are working. It's working with the executives. It's working with the non-execs. It's you don't know what sort of frame of mind somebody's going to be in. You don't know how people like to receive information. The course I teach on, we have one person who's severely dyslexic, so of course they don't want more long board papers, because that really inhibits how they work effectively. So I think coaching could really help with the chair, because I think sometimes if you've got to build a board, having somebody external to help you do that, because it's a lonely place, I think, being a chair, I think it could really help. And we do need to build boards. This was something that came up in Harvard 20 years ago. You actually got to build a board. It's not just going to miraculously work well, and you've got to keep building it, because it will change with people coming onto the board, people leaving. So I think coaching could be really useful for a chair in that role.
And but we talk about coaching itself, but there's also coaching skills. And Mark, I want to bring you in on this, because when we first met a couple of years ago, or re-met, having known each other before, but when we re-met, one of the things you did talk about was not coaching necessarily board members, but the coaching skills that you found once you were on board, you were beginning to use. So what is it about coaching skills that might help boards?
Well, let me give you two simple examples. And it sounds obvious in one sense, but all too often at boards that I've watched, the questions are closed. They need to be open. They need to allow the person reporting to the board to give you more than just what's written on the page. And alongside that is it, and that's a classic coaching skill, is knowing the right question to ask, and creating the space in which someone can give you the full picture and not just the headlines. I think also listening for what is not said is very important. Believe it or not, I learned that in politics before going back into business. And very often on a select committee, it is what is not said that is really interesting. And that is the same on a board when you're working with an executive team. It's thinking to yourself, we're talking about profit today, but actually, are we considering, for example, where we are in terms of cash flow? Now, it may well be that in a comprehensive set of financial papers, you will have all of that. But it's just being mindful of what is not being said, and therefore using the right questions that create that space in which people can give the board the full picture and not necessarily just the edited highlights. So those are two things I would suggest.
Mm. And do you as a chair use what you learnt at Henley in the way in which you manage the meetings?
Very much so. I mean, I've always been someone who likes meetings that start on time, that the chair does not speak first. The chair's job is to enable that dialogue to take place, perhaps to summarize or to highlight where he thinks there's been a gap, where he or she thinks there's been a gap. So I think those are very good skills. And Henley's was very helpful, particularly on that listening issue of understanding, particularly the non-verbal signals. And, there's a fascinating dynamic around a board meeting, I always feel, when you sense the things that where there's some agreement and disagreement, often unspoken.
Yeah. And that you're chair of Remco's amongst being an NED, and obviously executive coaching and your background in HR, where you will have used either advisory or coaching skills quite a bit over the years. How's the coaching skills itself helping you as an NED and chair of a committee?
It's really important, actually. I think, let me give you an example. As Remco chair, I quite often find that there is a general lack of knowledge or understanding about reward. And when I talk reward, I'm talking total reward. I don't just mean the pay and bonus, but the whole pensions, benefits, etc., and how that's a package that's so important to attract, retain, link to engagement, etc. So a lot of my coaching skills are in helping the rest of the committee and then the board understand the different pieces of the jigsaw, but bring them together. And quite often you then extend that coaching skill set and sharing of knowledge and experience with the executive as well. So you're helping them understand why there are certain questions that the Remco might have, why there are certain challenges around certain areas, why differentiation in performance is so important rather than a homogenous grouping. So all of those coaching skills need to come out. I agree as a chair, but also in terms of helping upskill and engage board members
Mm,
and the executive as well.
mm.
Yeah, the executive is an interesting one, and Stephen, I wouldn't mind coming to you on this. What do you think? Because the coaching proposition that we've been talking about is coaching board members, but also coaching those who have to work with boards. And what do you think executives most often get wrong when presenting to boards?
Well, I know what I kind of end up coaching them most often on, and that's around the sort of the politics of it, the positioning of it, how to engage with people, and that's, I mean, hardly surprising because that's their job, isn't it? How to persuade a board to do something. I think your question was, what do they get wrong? And I think maybe two things. First, to pick up on Anat's point about her role as a Remco chair and working with the executive. I think one of the things that they often don't do enough is work with their relevant committee chair. I mean, if you're going to a board and presenting on an issue, it's probably gone through ARC or REMCO or NOMCO or Finance Committee or something else, and you want to have really explored that with the relevant chair. And then the second thing that I think people, it's not that they get it wrong, but to do this well would be really good, which is to bring the full understanding onto the table. I mean, Mark talked about the question of how do you get the full picture and deep listening skills as a board member, but actually rather than trying to put the 1,000-page document, really think about how do you create a better understanding in the board about what's going on, including what's uncertain and what's incomplete. Now, the first time you do that, that might be quite hard, but in time, that will build a much deeper, much more effective relationship with the board.
Mhm. And I'm going to ask you, Ian, and whether you have some thoughts on this, having worked with the board reviews and the executives and you must have in your time as you supported boards back in your previous career. What I say go. What do executives do wrong? But what are the challenges really for executives who have got to somehow get their paper to the board and then turn up and present?
Um, well, I think one of the challenges is that boards often meet too frequently. And I remember doing a board review of a FTSE 250 where in fact, it was the second time I'd done it. The first time I'd recommended they reduce the numbers of meetings from 11 a year to 10. This is scheduled meetings. And again, when I did it again, I suggested reducing it. And I remember the CFO saying to me, she said, we do the board meeting, we all prepare for it, and as soon as we've finished, we've got to, we've got to start again. So I think, one of the things NEDs need to think a little bit about is is it a good use of time to be meeting so often? I mean, actually making the decisions at board is only a really small part of the process. You've got to implement them. And this, as you know, came a lot up in COVID. Very good, very effective chairs, said to other NEDs, please don't be on the back of the executives all the time, because otherwise they can't get on with their job. I think, secondly, I guess in terms of presenting to boards executive, the mistakes they make, there is a lot of reading out presentations, and the papers are frequently too long. I mean, we have a phrase amongst the board review community, which I think was taken from Mark Twain, or adapted from Mark Twain. Which, I wanted to write a short paper, but I only had time to write a long one. And so they just stack lots of stuff in rather than actually really honing down to what's important. I did a review a couple of years ago where the chair banned PowerPoint, and I remember talking to one of the execs about it, and they said, well, when she did this, we were in despair, but actually we've all written better papers since then. We've really had to think much more about it. So I think it's partly that. I think it's also, I think Stephen mentioned about working with members of the board more, and really effective boards, and this is down to both sides, is having that mentoring relationship between non-execs and execs. And I would also say it doesn't necessarily have to be a non-exec in your particular area. So you don't, there can be some advantage to having a mentor on the board who doesn't have your area of specialism. So I think having that sort of, that relationship, I think is really important. So I guess the final thing I would say to any exec is, and this was something that was highlighted in a book many of you may have come across called The Secret Life of Boards. The recommendation there is become a non-executive director before you become a CEO, because you'll get a real understanding, or it doesn't have to be a CEO, but an exec, you'll get a real understanding of what it's like from the other side. And I think that's really true. I've seen quite ineffective executive teams where they've no experience of NEDs before. So actually having that experience, I think, will make for better execs.
It's interesting. I had to present at board at one of my former companies, and I was prepared for that session by an actress who specialized in communication skills. And we did our first version of presenting our paper, and then we did work with her, and then went to the board, which happened to be in Bermuda, which was a nice additional benefit. But the presentation was in a different league, even though I say it myself, to the presentation that we first gave when we virtually read the PowerPoint and just said what we put on the slides. And so I think there is some advantage in preparing executives, and particularly people who don't present that often to the board, to improve how they get their message across and that kind of thing. I think in terms of timing, we're getting towards the end of our time. Are there any questions from people and participants here they'd like to ask our panel members? No, that's obviously fine. Oh, no, Laurence.
Hello, thank you everyone for the presentation, super insightful. I was wondering about specific challenge that you have identified at board levels with directors who are from minorities, so maybe women, people of color, or someone basically. There's been a big drive around pushing more diversity on boards. But I've also, from my conversation, have seen some people who are more diverse also struggle to get their points across.
Would anyone on the panel like to answer that? And Mark?
I would, if I may, Chris. Yeah. So I've had a couple of instances of that, and I think that the responsibility does rest with the chair. It's very important that individual makes people welcome, understands, perhaps goes through it. In fact, I chair a board which has a board apprentice, and that scheme is about helping young people who perhaps might otherwise not know what on earth a board does, who is a member of staff, and it's a really good way of changing the dynamic within the meeting, but also encouraging people from backgrounds who otherwise might not know what a board is and how it works and what its functions are, and helps to demystify it. But I think the responsibility does rest with the chair to make sure that that person understands what's happening, and they've had a chance to go through it carefully. And obviously, the executive team needs to spend a little bit of time just explaining the format, the process, and so on. So that would be my experience. But I do recommend the idea of a board apprentice to those who are thinking about how you can bring on perhaps people from outside the usual, dare I say, channels and backgrounds that come onto boards.
Yeah. And can I ask one of our female directors? I mean, clearly over the last 10, 15 years in the UK, there's been a huge push to balance the genders on boards, and statistically that's begun to happen quite substantially, probably less at executive level rather than non-executive level, funnily enough. But Annette, as a woman on a board, is there anything specific around gender that you found from your own life and career and experience?
Yeah, no, I would say it's probably true of executive as well as non-executive. I've always tended to be in the minority. Yeah. Now that's not necessarily that you just get used to it. It's good when there are other female members of the executive and board as well. It makes you feel more comfortable, etc. as well. But I will also share with you that, and it's still happened until recently, that I've been talked across by a male colleague, and in which case I've had to say, excuse me, I hadn't quite finished my point. Let me just finish and then I'll hand over to you. But equally, I will share with you that as a REMCO chair, and this happened recently, one male member talked over another female member, and I, as chair, went, sorry, can we just let so and so finish? And I talked to him afterwards and said, just be aware that you have a tendency to cut across people. I'm hoping it's not just women, but you have a tendency to do it. So I
Yeah.
think there is a duty of care, but there is no denying that it can be, is difficult the right word? Awkward. And you have to be fairly self-confident and reassured to go, actually, excuse me, can I just finish my point as well?
Yeah. Thank
Which
you.
is why I think coaching could help with that as well.
Thank you. Okay, well, look, in the interest of time, thank you for that question. I'm going to just sort of wrap up. Um, and uh,
Chris, I think Chris Mallin had a question. I don't know.
Chris, would you like just to ask your question? We're a bit tight on time, but yes.
I'm conscious of the time. First of all, thank you. Funny enough, I have a conversation with my chair of the board that I sit on as a non-exec, and so much you've said today is incredibly helpful. I mean, my question, and maybe it's for a different time, was really, to what extent do you see the role of non-execs changing in terms of expectations? And it comes back to Mark's comments about culture and the balance between effectiveness and experience. What I found recently applying for other NED roles is I've been quite surprised at what the expectation is from me. And it has become much, much more narrow, much more specific about a specific business issue and or what's your book of contacts like. And that experience and that exposure, what I thought they would really look for the breadth of experience really never comes up. So it was just, I wondered if that was an observation that others had shared, and is that an issue or not?
Can I ask anyone who would like to answer that to chip in?
Chris, I have the same problem. I agree with you. Not time and again they want an IT specialist, or they're really, it says, and the word network comes very high up on the list of what they want, which basically means is, how many well-off people who might like to invest do you know? So it is a shame, and I think the danger is it'll change how boards are shaped if it's all about silos. At the end of the day, the board is there to make sure that the big picture is thought about and understood. And if we've just got lots of specialists, then I think the board will be weaker.
Yeah. Ian, you'll be the last to reply. Your thoughts, and then we will just go to the final slides.
So very quickly, I think Mark's right. I mean, one of the code says, a board is not a group of subject matter experts. And one of the things I talk to Neds about is, or trainee Neds, is that you've got to be able to go outside of your area of expertise. You know, and talk about things that you're you know, that don't form part of your experience. I think the only thing I was going to say is the ID, in terms of Ned background, has recently issued a report, and one of the most interesting point for me was that we need to widen the type of people that come on to the board as Ned. So it's not just people who've set on Exco, but actually a much wider pool, so consultants and others. So I think that's maybe one way it will change.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. So thank you everyone for attending. Let me just whoops, I seem to have a little technical issue. Continue to share. So I'm going to be very brief. Yeah, we obviously have assembled this panel today, whom I'd like to thank for their contribution, because I think it's been a very interesting conversation. But we're in the business of supporting executives, but also looking to support board members. And the coaching can be individual, it can be around the team, it can be around those who are supporting the board, or it could be those who aspire to be board members. We can certainly support people in all of those ways. So we're here to do that. If you'd like to get in touch, obviously feel free. And we've already done some questions. And I'd like to wrap up by thanking everybody, both those who presented and those who came along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheerio. Thank you.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.